Welcome to Harvesting the Potential, a national conference on cover crops and soil health. My name is Jim Gulliford. I'm the Executive Director of the Soil and Water Conservation Society. On behalf of our sponsors and our partners and a wonderful planning committee that put together this conference for you, we're pleased that you accepted our invitation to come to Omaha. Yes, come to Omaha in February, and we've done the dance. We danced the weather challenge of the last couple of days, and as you can see from the way that the room is filling up, that our participants in this conference have done a great job of navigating scheduled and unscheduled flight problems and made their way here to Omaha. Omaha is an interesting city. It's the home of Union Pacific. It's the home of the College World Series, but it's also the gateway to a number of very interesting environmental and natural areas, places that I've had an opportunity to experience in the years that I lived in the Des Moines area. If you go just about 35 miles north of here, you can be at the DeSoto Bend National Wildlife Area. And if you're there in the fall when the geese are moving south, you can see at one time as many as 750,000 snow geese gathered there, feeding, again, building their energy to continue their migration south. And if you've had a chance to see them disturbed, they will rise like a mushroom cloud, chatter, and make a wonderful noise and settle again. So it's a really interesting and unique area. You head west of here to the Grand Island and Kearney area, and you can see in the spring of the year the sandhill crane migration, where for many, many years, generations, the sandhill cranes have gathered along the Platte River, again, feeding in the agricultural areas immediately adjacent to the river and spending the nights on the river themselves, and again, preparing themselves to continue their migration to their nesting grounds considerably north. But it's also an area, an invitation or an opening to a couple of very interesting landscape areas as well. If you've had a chance to look at the Luss Hills just across the border in western Iowa down into Missouri, you see a very unique Luss deposit landscape that is unique to this part of the world and one other place in China. Or you can also go to northwest Nebraska and you can see the Niobrara River in the sandhills of northwest Nebraska. So it is a very interesting area. But perhaps what we know it for most is that it is central to Midwest agriculture. And we know that it's a part of America's heartland, and agriculture in this heartland has been developed to be a marvelous, productive agricultural industry. It's an industry that's served us well. As our country developed, we worked to bring agriculture to the land. We settled the land. We took advantage of the resources that were there, the soil, the water, the climate, and developed an industry that brings us food, fiber, fuel, forage, and the land and the capital assets of it and this environment continues to serve us very well today and give us this highly producing machine that not only gives us the food security of today, but it's an abundant, it's a safe, it's a plentiful, and reasonably cheap food supply that we enjoy. But it's that same soil, the same land resource that is going to be relied upon in the future to feed a growing population across not only this country, but around the world. Well, this agriculture that we've developed in this area has come at a cost as well. The land, our soil resource, the principal capital asset that our farmers and ranchers use, again, as the basic resource of agriculture, it's been worked hard, and I think sometimes we're kind when we just say it's been worked hard because it shows the effects of many years of intensive cultivation. For years, since the days of the Dust Bowl, we worked very hard as agencies, as farmers, as individuals to encourage our farmers and ranchers to address the challenge of erosion control and sediment loss. But we now realize that erosion control is not enough to sustain our agricultural resource. Historically, we focused on the plant as that major resource. We looked at the genetics of it, we looked at the outside influences, the rain, the inputs that we provided, and when we had a good harvest, we said it was essentially those factors, our management, our resources that made that possible. But I think we're going to learn in the future that it's as much our soil and how those resources are used that are going to make the difference And I don't think that we valued the soil resource in that plant and production model well enough. And as again I said, that's a soil resource that we've worked very hard over recent years. If you came to this conference and you drove across north central Iowa, it's an area that I'm very familiar with, you would have driven across what we called and if there hadn't been snow on a lot of the landscape, you'd have seen what I call the Clarion Nicolette Webster Soil Association. And when I took soils at Iowa State University 100 years ago, when we mapped that association and described the Clarion Nicolette Webster Soil Association, we looked at those convex knobs that were the Clarion soils, those side slopes that were Nicolettes, and those bottoms that were Webster soils. And I was terrible. I was terrible at those color charts. If you ever tried to figure those things out, about the only color that I could differentiate was dark organic matter topsoil A horizons and light soil subsoils that obviously were where the organic matter was much less prevalent. If you looked at the way the Clarion soil was originally described, and I'm not going to read it all to you, but it was featured with a dark brown A horizon, 7 to 12 inches thick. This is a till soil. It's a soil that developed under prairie vegetation. And I would ask you, if you have experience in this area now, what this soil looks like now. Now it's a light-colored knob that has experienced 100 years of agricultural production, and in many cases we see that not only is that initial light-colored knob, isn't there evidence of organic matter that's been lost to erosion and oxidation from tillage, but at the same time it's spreading, and it's spreading down those side slopes, and the light color is much more prevalent than it was even 20, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, when I was a student. And that's a problem. That's a sign that's a sign of soil that's being depleted, and that depletion, though, is masked by a remarkable agricultural system that supports, again, the growing of the crops and their harvest. So we see our yields increasing, but it still is at a cost to our soils. So it's time, I think, to address that degraded resource, but wonderfully, we have the tools to do that. And that's what the fundamental concept of soil health is all about, the practice of integrating cover crops and other management systems into our ag production systems to arrest the degradation that is occurring and, in fact, reverse that. So over the course of the next 2 days, you will hear and contribute to a conversation of how cover crops in a crop management system can prevent erosion, improve soil properties, address compaction, increase soil moisture holding capacity, increase soil organic matter, scavenge nutrients that would be lost into our water resources, and many, many more things that cover crops can do. And in fact, that's the magic of cover crops, is that you can choose how you will use cover crops, the type of cover crop you will plant, how you will manage it, how you will terminate it, how you may use it for forage. And all of those things are choices that the farmer has to make the cover crops serve their needs, but also address some of, again, our challenges of soil degradation. So that flexibility is something that we really want to stress and we really want to talk about. And again, it's the dynamic of what soil health is. But I'm going to leave that discussion to our experts, again, the conference presenters, and you, the conference participants, to have that interaction and have that conversation and develop the path forward that we hope will lead to a rapidly expanding use of cover crops in the agricultural landscape across not only this country, but in other places in the world. Because we know that agriculture, the environment, and the long-term sustainability and food security that we need as a nation and as a world depends upon how we will treat our soils. Well, before we get into our main program, I want to talk a little bit about the actual conference itself. I want to recognize our principal sponsors, the USDA Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program of USDA again, and the Howard G. Buffett Foundation. Their financial support for the conference was essential to putting this together and making it work for all of us. And on page 28 of your program, and I'm not going to encourage you to turn to that right now, but you'll see a listing of the conference planning committee people. It was a great group of people to work with. Everybody pitched in, everybody brought ideas, and everybody, I think, contributed, again, to the types of speakers that you'll have a chance to hear from, the moderators that will be part of the presentations, and encourage your discussion. And again, those are things that we're very grateful to, again, the contributions of the planning committee. Also want to call attention to something that's sort of unique and that we're trying, I think, for one of the first times, at least at this scale, was the work of NRCS and the University of Missouri Columbia and all those who worked to develop the live streaming of the first couple of plenary sessions today. They're going to go out to more than 200 locations across the country, and I understand the Pacific Islands, perhaps even a location in Alaska, where people can hear our plenary speakers speak to the importance of cover crops. But secondly, they were all a set of, a toolkit, if you will, of materials that can help moderators at those sessions lead discussions where in those unique geographic areas, the participants in those outside locations can talk about the importance of cover crops and their needs, their interests, what they are looking for, and how they're using cover crops in their locations as well. So we think that that's a real unique opportunity, and hopefully by this time tomorrow morning, we'll be able to report back to you on how those sessions went, the type of attendance that we had, the type of participation. And over the long run, I think we'll be evaluating the success of this as this live streaming and discussion groups as a way of communicating and as a way of adding value to the messages that are going to occur here. A little bit on the logistics. The plenaries, again, they will serve our entire audience, but when we go live with our other sessions, those outside locations will not have an opportunity to ask questions, but you folks will. In the middle of your tables are cards, and as you hear the presentations by our panels and by our short scientific panel later in the morning, when you have questions, write them on these cards, address who you would like the question to be addressed to, and if you'll hold them up, we'll have people around the audience that will pick them up. So about an hour from now, or 45 minutes from now, as we get into those main presentations, take advantage of those cards and ask your questions. We won't have time for a lot of questions. We'll have a strict schedule that we'll have to stay on for our broadcast, but we'll get to a number of those, we'll screen them, and we'll get them to our panelists. And then this afternoon and tomorrow, we'll break down into much smaller groups, and this is where I think we certainly are counting on a lot greater interaction and participation by all of you. We'll have we'll have panel presentations this afternoon, again, from farmers, from experts, from others that will lead these discussions, and then on tomorrow, we'll have, after our plenary session in the morning, our principal activity will be discussion. It won't be presentations. It'll be interaction. What are the limiting factors that we're facing as we want to, again, advance the use of cover crops across the landscapes of our country?